The Silent Wife's Awakening opening hook, 30 to 45 seconds. I stood on that stage in my $10,000 dress, looked my billionaire husband in the eyes, and pressed play on the recording that would destroy him. His voice filled the ballroom. I only married her because she's boring and predictable. 500 people gasped. He went pale. And I smiled, because for 6 years, he thought I was too boring to notice. Too quiet to fight back. Too weak to do anything about it. He was wrong. And by the time you finish this story, you'll understand why the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how I went from silent wife to the woman who brought down an empire. Stay with me, because what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know what's funny? Everyone thought I had the perfect life. And honestly, for a while, I thought so too. My name is Rachel, and I want to tell you about the day I discovered that my entire marriage was a lie. But before we get there, let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like from the outside. Picture this, a beautiful home in Miami, Florida. Not just any home, but one of those mansions you see in magazines with the palm trees lining the driveway and the ocean view from the bedroom window. A closet full of beautiful dresses I never even asked for. Invitations to charity events where people donated more money in one night than most families see in a year. My husband, Daniel Wright, was 50 years old and owned one of the biggest real estate development companies in the country. He built hotels, shopping centers, luxury apartments. His face was on billboards. His name was in newspapers. And me? I was his wife. His perfect, smiling wife. I was 36 when everything fell apart. But let me take you back to the beginning, to who I was before all of this. I grew up in a small town in Georgia. My dad worked construction. My mom cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but we had love. We had dinner together every night. We had laughter. When I graduated high school, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I worked 3 jobs to pay for it. I studied environmental science because I cared about making the world better. After college, I got a job with a nonprofit organization that helped communities fight against pollution and unsafe building practices. I wasn't making much money, but I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like my life had purpose. That's where I met Daniel. He came to speak at a conference about sustainable development. He walked right up to me after my presentation and said I was the most passionate person he'd ever heard speak. He asked me to dinner. I said yes. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. But when you're young and someone successful and charming pays attention to you, you don't always see clearly. 6 months later, he proposed. The ring was huge. I remember thinking it was too much, too flashy. But he said I deserved the world. He said he wanted to give me everything I never had growing up. He said he loved my kindness, my passion, my big heart. We got married in this huge ceremony that felt more like a business event than a wedding. There were 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. But I told myself this was just how things were done in his world. I told myself I needed to adapt. The first year was beautiful. He surprised me with trips to Paris, to Tokyo, to islands I'd never heard of. He bought me gifts I never asked for. He told me I didn't need to work anymore, that I could focus on the things I loved. So I started a small foundation focused on environmental justice and safe housing for low-income communities. Daniel seemed proud at first. He'd mention it at dinner parties. My wife is saving the world, he'd say with a smile. And I felt seen. I felt valued. But somewhere around year 3, things changed. It was small things at first. He'd take phone calls during our dinners. He'd cancel our plans at the last minute. He'd make little comments about what I wore, who I talked to, what I said at events. Maybe don't mention the foundation tonight, he'd say. It makes people uncomfortable when you talk about poverty at these kinds of parties. I told myself he was stressed. Running a billion-dollar company wasn't easy. I could be more understanding. I could be more supportive. I could be the wife he needed. That word, needed, it should have been my warning sign. By year 5, we were strangers living in the same house. He had his office wing. I had my rooms. We came together for photos, for events, for show. We'd smile for cameras and hold hands for the press. Everyone said we were relationship goals. In private, he barely looked at me. I'd try to talk about us, about our future, about maybe having children. He'd wave me off. Not now, Rachel. I'm busy. We'll talk later. Later never came. I started noticing other things too. How he'd cut me off when I was speaking to his business partners. How he'd introduce me as just my wife Rachel, without ever mentioning my foundation or my work. How he'd roll his eyes when I got passionate about environmental issues at dinner. I was shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, more and more boring. But I didn't leave. You want to know why? Because I was scared. I'd watched my mother struggle after my father got sick and couldn't work. I'd watched her worry about every bill, every expense. Some part of me was terrified of going back to that uncertainty. So I stayed. I played my role. I became exactly what he seemed to want: quiet, agreeable, forgettable. I became the silent wife. And that's exactly where he wanted me. Silent. Unseen. Unheard. What Daniel didn't know was that silent people hear everything. And quiet people? Were always watching, always learning, always remembering. He thought my silence meant I wasn't paying attention. That was his biggest mistake. Because the thing about underestimating someone is this. By the time you realize they've been 10 steps ahead of you the whole time, the game is already over. And I was about to change the rules of the game completely. It was a Tuesday in September. I remember because it was the first cool evening we'd had after a brutal summer. I was supposed to be at my book club. We met every Tuesday at my friend Lisa's house to drink wine and talk about everything except books. But that night, 10 minutes into my drive, I realized I'd forgotten my phone on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't go back. Almost just went without it. But something told me to turn around. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just dumb luck. I pulled into our driveway at 8:15. Daniel's car was there, along with a white BMW I didn't recognize. I figured he had a business meeting. He did that sometimes, brought people home to talk deals over expensive whiskey in his office. I walked in through the side door, planning to grab my phone and leave quietly. That's when I heard voices coming from his office. The door was cracked open just a little. I heard Daniel's laugh, that deep laugh that used to make my heart skip. Then I heard a woman's voice. Young, flirty, confident. I should have walked away. Should have grabbed my phone and left. But my feet wouldn't move. I stood there in the hallway frozen. Then I heard my name. Rachel. And then I heard the words that would shatter my entire world. I only married her because I needed to clean up my image. Daniel's voice was casual, like he was talking about the weather. After that scandal with the last development project, I needed to look stable. Responsible. She's boring, predictable, exactly what I needed. Environmental activist wife makes me look like I care about more than just money. The woman laughed. I later found out her name was Vanessa. His assistant. His mistress. So you don't actually love her? Vanessa asked. Daniel actually scoffed. Please. This is business, Vanessa. Rachel makes me look good to investors and the public. The caring husband with the sweet charity wife. She doesn't ask questions, doesn't make waves, just smiles and does what she's told. Perfect. There was another voice. Stephen, his business partner. She is pretty boring though, isn't she? I mean, nice enough, but no personality. Not like you, Vanessa. They all laughed. 3 people in my husband's office, in my house, laughing about how boring I was. About how I was just a tool in Daniel's public relations strategy. My hands started shaking. My vision blurred with tears. But through the shock and pain, something else started to grow. Something cold and sharp. Anger. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I captured every word. Every cruel laugh. Every dismissive comment about my intelligence, my appearance, my purpose in his life. Vanessa asked if he ever felt guilty about using me like this. Daniel said, "Why would I? She's got everything she needs. Beautiful home, nice clothes, security. She should be grateful." I recorded for 15 more minutes. Then I walked back outside, got in my car, and just sat there in the dark. I played the recording back 3 times. Each time the words hurt more. Each time I felt smaller. But each time I played it, something else happened too. I started to wake up. You see, for 5 years, I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. Accepting scraps of affection. Accepting being dismissed and ignored. Accepting being treated like a decoration instead of a person. But that night, sitting in my car, listening to my husband admit he'd never loved me, something inside me broke open. And what came out wasn't just pain. It was power. I didn't go to book club. I drove to a hotel, checked in, and spent the entire night awake. I went through our entire marriage in my mind. And suddenly, everything made sense. The way he'd encouraged me to quit my job to make me financially dependent on him. The way he'd love-bombed me in the beginning to lock me down quickly. The way he'd slowly isolated me from my old friends. The prenup his lawyers had pushed that left me with almost nothing if we divorced. But here's what Daniel didn't know. Here's what he'd completely overlooked while he was busy thinking I was too boring to pay attention to. My grandmother had died 3 years into our marriage. She left me money. Not billions, but enough. I'd never told Daniel the full amount. I'd put it in a separate account and invested it carefully. And my foundation, that cute little charity he dismissed, it had grown. We had board members who were former senators, environmental lawyers, investigative journalists, and city council members. My connections in the environmental and political world ran deep. Deeper than his in some circles. And here's the really ironic part. My foundation focused on holding developers accountable for environmental violations and unsafe building practices. The very things Daniel's company was guilty of. I spent that night making one phone call. To my college roommate, Jennifer. She was a lawyer now. A really good one. I told her everything. She told me to come to her office first thing in the morning. The next day, I learned something interesting about that prenup Daniel's lawyers had written. There was a clause about fraud. If I could prove he'd entered the marriage under false pretenses, for reasons other than love and genuine partnership, everything changed. And I had his own words on tape admitting exactly that. Jennifer told me not to act immediately. Men like Daniel are arrogant, she said. Use that. Let him think he's won. Meanwhile, we build a case so strong he'll never see it coming. So I did something that probably sounds crazy. I went home. And I acted like nothing had happened. Have you ever pretended everything was fine when your whole world was falling apart? That's what the next 3 months felt like. When Daniel asked about book club that Tuesday night, I smiled and said it was lovely. When he barely looked up from his phone at breakfast, I poured his coffee like always. When he canceled our dinner plans for the 3rd week in a row, I said I understood. I became even more quiet, even more agreeable, even more boring. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator. What he found made me physically sick. Daniel and Vanessa had been having an affair for 2 years. But that wasn't even the worst part. The investigator found evidence that Daniel's company was under investigation by the Environmental Protection Agency. There were complaints about toxic materials in his buildings, falsified safety reports, bribes to building inspectors. People had gotten sick. Children had gotten sick from the materials he'd used in low-income housing projects because they were cheaper. He'd cut corners to make more profit, and people were suffering for it. And he'd married me, someone known for environmental activism, to make himself look ethical. To give himself cover. My reputation, my work, my credibility. He'd weaponized all of it to protect himself. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I also felt something else. Clarity. Purpose. For the first time in 5 years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I spent the next 3 months documenting everything. Every meeting between Daniel and Vanessa. Every hidden bank account. Every piece of evidence of his company's environmental violations. Every bribe. Every lie. I met secretly with my foundation's board members. These were people who'd built their careers on integrity, on protecting communities, on fighting for justice. When I showed them what Daniel had been doing, they were furious. We agreed that my foundation would be filing formal complaints and supporting the EPA investigation. I contacted the EPA investigator and handed over everything my private investigator had found. They were very interested. I moved my personal money into accounts Daniel couldn't touch. I copied every important document. I prepared a statement. I contacted news outlets. And then I had an idea. Daniel's company held a huge annual gala every November. 500 guests. Media coverage. Investors. City officials. Business leaders from across the country. It was his biggest event of the year, where he showed off his success and made major deals. I volunteered to help plan it. When I told Daniel, his face actually lit up. Really, Rachel? That's wonderful. It'll show everyone what a team we are. A team. Right. I planned every single detail of that gala. I made sure every important person would be there. Every investor. Every city official. Every journalist who'd been following the EPA investigation rumors. I made sure that ballroom would be packed. My friend Lisa asked me one day, "Rachel, are you okay? You seem different." I smiled. "I'm fine. Just busy with the gala." "You seem, I don't know, stronger or something." I hugged her. I'm just finally becoming who I was always supposed to be. 1 week before the gala, I made my final moves. I had divorce papers prepared. Not just regular divorce papers. Papers that invoked the fraud clause in our prenup, citing his recorded admission that he'd married me for image purposes, not love. I scheduled meetings with journalists for the day after the gala. Exclusive interviews where I'd tell my story. I warned my family. Called my mom and told her to watch the news after the gala. She asked why. I said, because I'm about to stop being silent. The Monday before the gala, I had the divorce papers delivered to Daniel at his office. He called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. He came home that night, and I was sitting in the living room, calm as could be. Rachel, what is this? He waved the papers at me. What are you doing? I looked at him. Really looked at him. And I realized I didn't feel anything anymore. No love. No hate. Just nothing. I'm leaving you, Daniel. You can't. The prenup. Read it again. Specifically the fraud clause. He went pale. What are you talking about? I played him the recording. His own voice filled the room. I only married her because I needed to clean up my image. She's boring, predictable, exactly what I needed. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back. That's illegal. You can't record someone without. Florida is a two-party consent state, but there's an exception for when someone has reasonable suspicion of a crime. Your company's environmental violations count. I checked with my lawyer. Your lawyer? He looked genuinely shocked, like he couldn't believe boring little Rachel had thought ahead. We'll talk more at the gala, I said calmly. I assume you still want me there? For appearances? His face went from pale to red. Rachel, if you do anything to embarrass me at that event. You'll what, Daniel? Divorce me? Too late. See you Friday. I walked past him and went to my room. Locked the door. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Because I knew that in 5 days, everything would change. In 5 days, the silent wife would finally speak. And when I did, the whole world would listen. I spent those last few days in a strange state of calm. People think revenge is hot and angry. But real revenge? It's cold. It's calculated. It's patient. And it was almost time. Friday came. The day of the gala. The day Daniel's perfect world would come crashing down. I put on my most beautiful dress. Did my hair and makeup perfectly. Put on the diamond necklace Daniel had given me for our anniversary. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The scared girl who'd married a powerful man was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone stronger. Someone ready. The ballroom of the Grand Seaside Hotel was absolutely stunning that night. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Round tables covered in white silk surrounded a stage where Daniel would usually give his annual speech about success and growth and building the future. 500 people filled that room. Developers, investors, city council members, journalists. Everyone who mattered in Daniel's world was there. Daniel was working the room, shaking hands, laughing, making deals. He kept glancing at me nervously. I just smiled and played the perfect hostess. Greeting guests, making small talk, being boring, predictable Rachel. At 8 o'clock, it was time for the welcome speech. Daniel was supposed to give it. He started walking toward the stage. I got there first. Good evening, everyone. My voice came out stronger than I expected. The room quieted down. For those who don't know me, I'm Rachel Wright, Daniel's wife. I saw confusion on Daniel's face. He started to step forward. I held up my hand. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. When Daniel and I got married 6 years ago, I thought I understood what marriage meant. Partnership, trust, honesty, building a life together based on love and respect. The room was completely silent now, everyone watching. But 2 months ago, I learned something that changed everything. I learned that my husband didn't marry me for love. He married me because he needed to improve his public image. Because after some questionable business deals, he needed to look more respectable, more caring, more ethical. Whispers started spreading through the crowd. Daniel stood up. Rachel, stop this right now. My voice didn't shake. Sit down, Daniel. Something in my tone made him sit. The whole room saw it. Boring Rachel giving an order and Daniel obeying. I have a recording I'd like you all to hear. I nodded to the tech team I'd hired personally. Daniel's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system, crystal clear. I only married her because I needed to clean up my image. She's boring, predictable, exactly what I needed. Environmental activist wife makes me look like I care about more than just money. She doesn't ask questions, doesn't make waves, just smiles and does what she's told. Perfect. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the room exploded. People talking over each other. Phones coming out. Daniel stood up again, his face bright red. I waited for quiet. But here's what Daniel didn't know. While he thought I was too boring to pay attention, I was paying attention to everything. My foundation has been investigating environmental violations by development companies. And guess whose company kept showing up? I brought up documents on the screens behind me. Photos of crumbling walls. Test results showing toxic materials. Medical reports of children with respiratory problems. Email chains showing Daniel knew about the problems and covered them up. Daniel Wright's company has been using banned materials in low-income housing projects because they're cheaper. He's falsified safety inspections. He's bribed building officials. And when the EPA started investigating, he married me to use my reputation as an environmental activist as a shield. To make himself look like someone who cares about the environment and communities. The room erupted again. Investors were standing. Board members were shouting. Journalists were recording everything. As of this morning, my foundation has turned over all evidence to the EPA. We're cooperating fully with their investigation. The families affected are filing a class action lawsuit. And I've filed for divorce, invoking the fraud clause in our prenup because he admitted on tape that he married me under false pretenses. I looked directly at Daniel. His perfect image was crumbling in real time. You thought I was boring because I didn't make waves. Because I stayed quiet. Because I smiled and nodded. You mistook my kindness for weakness. My patience for stupidity. My silence for ignorance. My voice got stronger with each word. That was your mistake, Daniel. Because quiet people, we see everything. We hear everything. We remember everything. And when we finally speak, the whole world listens. I stepped off the stage. Security guards I'd hired personally escorted me toward the exit. Behind me, chaos. Investors surrounding Daniel. Journalists shouting questions. His perfect world falling apart. As I reached the door, I heard someone shout, "Daniel, is it true you knowingly used toxic materials in family housing?" I didn't turn around. I kept walking. Lisa met me outside. She hugged me tight. "Oh my God, Rachel. That was incredible." I started shaking then. All the adrenaline, all the fear, all the emotion I'd been holding back for months came flooding out. I cried in her arms in the parking lot while inside. My husband's empire collapsed. "I did it," I whispered. "I actually did it." "You did more than that," Lisa said. "You told the truth. You stood up for yourself and for all those families he hurt. You were brave." I shook my head. I wasn't brave. I was just tired of being silent. We drove to her house. Away from the chaos. Away from Daniel. Away from that whole world. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists. Lawyers. Even some of Daniel's business partners who wanted to distance themselves from him. I turned it off. That night, I sat on Lisa's couch, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea, and watching the news coverage. Every channel was covering it. Real estate mogul exposed. Environmental scandal rocks development world. Wife's revenge brings down empire. They called it revenge. But it wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was truth. It was a woman who'd been silent for too long finally finding her voice. And using it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. But I also felt something else. Free. For the first time in 6 years, I felt completely, absolutely free. I want to tell you what happened in the months after that night. Because this isn't just a story about revenge or taking someone down. It's a story about what happens when you finally stop living someone else's life and start living your own. The next few weeks were intense. The news wouldn't stop covering the story. Daniel's company stock crashed within 48 hours. The EPA formally announced their investigation. Investors filed lawsuits. The company's board of directors forced Daniel to resign as CEO. The families affected by the toxic materials in their homes started getting media attention. Their stories made people angry. Made people care. My foundation helped connect them with lawyers who took their case pro bono. Vanessa disappeared from public view. Turned out she'd been embezzling money from the company too. She made a deal with prosecutors to testify against Daniel in exchange for a lighter sentence. The prenup situation played out exactly as Jennifer predicted. The court agreed that Daniel had entered the marriage fraudulently, using me as a prop for his public image. The prenup was invalidated. I kept the Miami house, my personal assets, and received a settlement that ensured I'd never have to worry about money again. But honestly, the money didn't matter to me as much as people might think. What mattered was that I got my voice back. My foundation received record donations after the gala. Turns out people appreciate someone who stands up for what's right, even when it costs them personally. We were able to expand our work, open offices in 3 more cities, hire more investigators. We helped pass new legislation requiring stricter oversight of building materials in low-income housing. We helped get regulations changed so that companies couldn't use toxic materials just because they were cheaper. We made sure that what Daniel did couldn't easily happen again. The families from those housing projects, many of them had their medical bills covered by the settlement money. Their homes were tested and repaired, or they were relocated to safe housing. It didn't undo what happened to them, but it helped. I was offered positions on environmental boards, speaking opportunities, a book deal. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hear what boring Rachel had to say. 6 months after the gala, I was sitting in my new office at our expanded foundation headquarters. It was smaller than the Miami mansion, but it was mine. Really mine. Not because some man gave it to me, but because I'd built something real. Lisa came by that day with coffee. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm good," I said. And I meant it. "Have you heard anything about Daniel?" I had. He was fighting multiple legal battles from a regular apartment in Fort Lauderdale. His billions had shrunk to millions, and those millions were disappearing fast in legal fees and settlements. But I didn't take pleasure in his downfall. I just felt nothing. "He's not my problem anymore," I told Lisa. She smiled. "You know what I'm proud of? You didn't just take him down. You built something. You're actually changing things." That meant everything to me. Because she was right. This wasn't just about destroying Daniel's empire. It was about using that moment to create something better. I started speaking at colleges, talking to young women about recognizing their worth, about not shrinking themselves to fit into someone else's life, about the power of patience and observation and knowing when to speak up. One girl came up to me after a talk and said, "My boyfriend keeps telling me I'm too ambitious, that I should be more supportive of his career." I looked at her. "Do you think you're too ambitious?" "No," she said quietly. "I don't." "Then you have your answer. Don't let anyone make you smaller. The right person will celebrate your ambition, not fear it." She hugged me. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." These moments reminded me why I went through everything I did. Not for revenge. For change. I won't lie and say everything has been perfect. There are still hard days. Days when I feel the sting of betrayal. Days when I wonder if I could have seen the signs earlier. Days when I'm angry at myself for staying as long as I did. But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful that I found the strength to record that conversation instead of running away. Grateful that I had people like Jennifer and Lisa who supported me. Grateful that I had the resources and connections to make a difference. Grateful that I didn't just escape, I transformed. A year after the gala, I was invited to speak at the same conference where I'd first met Daniel. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood on that stage and talked about environmental justice, about holding powerful people accountable, about using your voice to protect those who can't protect themselves. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She reminded me of myself 10 years ago. Passionate, idealistic, a little naive. "You're incredible," she said. "I want to do what you do. Change things. Make a difference." I smiled. "You can. But let me give you some advice. Don't ever make yourself smaller for someone else. Don't ever let anyone convince you that your passion is too much or that your voice is too loud. And if someone tries to use you as a prop in their life story, walk away. You deserve to be the main character in your own story." She nodded, tears in her eyes. As I watched her walk away, I thought about how far I'd come. From the silent wife who was afraid to speak up, to someone who used her voice to create real change. Daniel thought my silence meant I had nothing to say. But silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes silence is just someone gathering their strength, collecting evidence, preparing for the moment when their words will matter most. I learned that being underestimated is actually a gift. Because people don't guard themselves around someone they think is harmless. They show you who they really are. They tell you their secrets. They make mistakes. And if you're patient enough, if you're smart enough, if you're strong enough, you can use those mistakes to change everything. My life now looks nothing like it did during my marriage. I live in a smaller house. I drive a regular car. I don't go to fancy galas anymore unless it's for my foundation's work. But I'm happier than I've ever been. Because I'm finally living as myself. Not as someone's accessory. Not as a prop. Not as the boring wife. Just as Rachel. The woman who was underestimated and used that to change the world. So if you're reading this and you feel small, if you feel invisible, if someone is making you believe you're not enough, hear me. You are enough. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And when the time is right, when you're ready, speak. The world is waiting to hear what you have to say. And trust me, it'll be worth the wait. The end. Remember, being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's your secret weapon. Use it wisely.